In this video, we're going to model window and door steel bars. These bars here, then these here on the side for the small window, and the door bars here. For the bars in the front, we'll model just one set, and when we UV them, we'll duplicate them across for the front panel. So let's begin. I'm going to create a cube and move it into position where the window bars are going to go. I'm going to set height to 115 so this cube fits within that window frame, and I want to leave just a bit of space at the top and the bottom. Then for width, which is actually the way this cube is positioned, will be our depth. So for depth, I'm going to set it to 85, and the thickness of these bars is going to be set at 2, which is determined by our width value. You could manually scale this cube without having to enter specific values. I like to use them so it's easier for you to follow along. And to arrive at these numbers, I did have to try out a few values to get there. So for me, I just like to input specific dimensions when I work with architecture. But remember, you don't have to do that. You can just manually scale and get the right size just by eyeballing, just by seeing how it looks in comparison to the building itself. Let's modify the pivot point to be in the bottom back corner vertex. I'm going to position it into place, rotate it, and duplicate it 3 more times, just to see how these bars would look when they're all duplicated, if there's enough space for each bar to fit along this wall. So I'm still in object component mode, so we can easily duplicate and move them along 3 more times. And it fits. It looks great. So this is now our template from which we will create the window bars. Let's position this template back and set the rotation to 0. We want to work on our objects straight on and not when they're positioned at an angle. Let's go to Insert Edge Loop tool, and I'm going to reset it to default, and we're going to insert a set of edge loops horizontally and vertically. We're going to have 4 metal bars going across horizontally and then 8 bars going down vertically. So we're going to begin to insert these edge loops to block in where these bars are going to go. We will position them more accurately and snap them to the grid, but right now we just want to block them in to estimate where they're going to go. Let's go to front view and press Ctrl 1 to isolate select. Then we're going to change the grid spacing to 1. Here we're going to begin to snap the inserted edge loops to the grid. I'm quickly changing view along axes in order to see the object better. And for this view, I had to change it to positive X. We already determined that the thickness of these bars is going to be set at 2 units. So we're going to need to grab the inserted edge loops and snap them to the grid, making each bar at 2 units. We now want the 2 bars in the middle to be the same distance from the bottom and from the top. So first I'm going to eyeball it and position them to what looks right. Now I'm going to create a temporary cube, scale it to measure the distance between the bottom 2 bars, and then duplicate the cube, move it to the top, and this will give me the distance to move the second bar from the top to exact same distance as the one for the bottom. So this is a quick way to measure distances without having to use the grid. Let's go ahead and delete these 2 cubes. Next, let's insert a set of edge loops to create vertical bars. First, we're going to insert them and block them in without worrying about the distance between each bar. We're going to have 8 total bars going down vertically. Now that we have them blocked in, let's go to front view and begin to position them more accurately. I'm going to select each set of edges and make sure that each bar is 2 units thick. Also, the distance between each bar will be at about 10 units. So what I did was actually measure 10 grid units in distance between each bar. You might not have to go this precise. You could eyeball it, and if it looks right, then it's right. But I tried to be very precise. So now we have the bars positioned, and all we need to do is come in and delete these faces in between the bars. This will leave us with the bars themselves. We have missing faces on the inside of these bars, so we're going to use a pen to polygon tool to create the faces. go to Mesh Tools and activate Append to Polygon. Now left click on one edge to start the Append to Polygon, and then left click on the second edge to create the face. Then press G to reactivate Append to Polygon. So you left click on one edge, then left click on the second edge to create the polygon, and then press G to reactivate to continue using Append to Polygon. And we're going to do this for the entire mesh for all of the edges that are missing the face. This might take a little bit of time, but we do only have to do this once. And we just have to make sure that we don't miss any faces and that we create that polygon for all of the missing parts. The discoloration that you see, the black and gray gradient at the edges, is due to the soft edges. So we're going to fix that once we are done with Append to Polygon. But it's very common to see that when you're using this tool, because Maya is not quite sure for how to display the created edge on a new polygon. So it sometimes assigns a soft edge. And this is our case here. So let's select the mesh, hold Shift, right click hold, go to Soften Harden Edges, and choose Harden Edge. And here is our window bars. And they look pretty good. Let's go ahead and extrude a couple of faces at the top and the bottom for where these window bars would be held in place inside the wall window. So I'm just going to select these two faces at the top, hold Shift, left click drag to extrude, then snap to the grid, and use the front view to see how far we need to extrude and snap. And do the same thing for the bottom two faces. Now let's delete the faces that the player is not going to see. These two faces on the bottom and the top that we just extruded, and all of the faces in the back. So I'm going to select them all and delete them. One way to select a row of faces is to select one, then hold Shift and double click to select another. And this will select everything in between. Then once I have them selected, hit delete. And here is our front window bars. Let's delete history, and we're going to do a quick test. We're going to position it into place, rotate it, and then duplicate it across to see how it looks. And they look very good. Let's go ahead and delete, so we only have one, because we're going to need to UV this first before duplicating. We're going to have these bars share the UV space and use the same texture. So I'm going to position it back in the front, set the rotation back to 0, so we'll be ready to UV when we get there. We're not going to do it in this video because we have 2 more bar sets to do, so we're going to leave the UVs for later. Now we're going to create the bars for the small window. For this we're going to readjust the one we just created. Let's take the front window bars, duplicate it, rotate it 90 degrees, and move it over to the side. Snap the bottom of the bars so they are aligned with the bottom panel of the window. I'm going to go to side view or front view, and we're going to begin to adjust the overall size of these bars. Here I had to readjust the view along axis to a -Z value so we can see the object better. So you'll find yourself doing this a lot depending on which side of the building you're working on. In order to see the object better, you'll have to switch to positive or a negative view in the orthographic viewport. So we want to have 2 units of space between the window bars and the window frame. So here on the bottom and the left hand side, we have 2 units. Now we have to adjust the top and the right hand side to also have 2 units. We'll have to manually adjust the vertices so we maintain the 2 units for each bar. So let's go back to front view or side view, depending on the orientation of your building. And I'm going to go to vertex component mode and begin to move all these vertices down so they fit inside the window frame. Then let's snap the very top set of vertices to the top of the window frame, then making sure we leave 2 units of space. And then the first bar will be 2 units down, and the thickness of that bar, make sure it's also 2 units. Then we're going to grab the right hand side bar, drag it over, and again make sure that we snap to maintain the thickness of the bar at 2 units, and then we have enough space on the right hand side between the window and the window bars, also 2 units. So essentially what we're really doing is making sure that this window bar is centered and it maintains exact set of dimensions for each side and for each bar. Now we only want to have one bar running across horizontally. So that means we need to delete the faces for one of them. So I'm going to delete the ones for the bottom, switch over to face component mode, and just quickly delete these faces. I'm going to move the set of vertices for this bar about halfway down the window. We now need to delete these set of vertices, but we can't just delete them because it won't work. So we'll use a pen to polygon to close up these gaps first. And then we're going to select all of these edges, double clicking to select them all, and then hold shift and continue to double click to add to a selection, and then control delete to remove them. It's beginning to get there. We're now going to extrude the single face on each side to create additional geometry for where these window bars would be attached to the building. And it's just one face here, so we're going to select it, hold shift, left click drag to extrude, and then snap to the grid so it snaps to the side of the building, and repeat the same step on the other side. Let's delete history, and for the last step we need to adjust the bars to have the same spacing. So in my case I need about 11 units to have the same spacing between each. So I'm just going to grab all the vertices for each bar and just move them over, and I'm going to do this for both sides. So do a couple on one side, switch over to the other side, move them over, and just keep doing that until they all have been aligned to have the same amount of spacing between each. That is looking very good. Let's delete the couple of faces in the back that the player won't see. Check our pivot point, it looks good. Delete history and freeze transformations. We are now done with the side window. And the last set of bars we're going to do is the one for the doors. So let's go ahead and take the front window bars and use that as our base. We're going to duplicate it and move it into position in front of the door. We're going to place it all the way down to the ground and to the right hand side to make sure it aligns right in front of the door. We want to leave 2 units of space on the bottom, on the right, and on top, just like we did for the window bars. These window bars and the door bars are never flush up against the wall. There's always a bit of space all around the window and door bars. And actually I'm going to give more space for the top and the bottom. So I'm going to raise this a bit up at about 4 units from the ground, and then delete these faces on the bottom and the top. And our grid spacing currently is set to 1 unit. Now let's adjust the top half of these bars to fit the door frame. So I'm going to grab half side of these vertices, pull them up, and then let's adjust the very top bar. We're going to need 4 grid spaces of space, just like we have for the bottom. And then we're going to adjust the exterior thickness of this entire frame to be 3 units. So it's a bit thicker than the bars inside. So I'm just going to select one set of vertices for the outer frame and make it 3 units thick. So we're going to do this for the top, the side, and the bottom. And we're going to deal with the left hand side in a bit. And I'm deciding all of this on the fly just by thinking that it would look better if the exterior frame was a bit thicker. And you don't have to follow exact thickness dimensions for each bar. You could increase it to 3 or 4 units depending on the type of building you're creating and the art style you are after. So these bar thicknesses work for this building type and for our art style. But remember, you have the full discretion for what you want to go with and what looks good in your environment. So here I'm beginning to adjust the left hand side bar. So I pulled the set of vertices all the way to the left and adjusting the thickness to 3 units. And now we have the exterior frame of these bars completed. Now I want to insert an extra bar on the left hand side. So instead of using the one we already have and taking away from the middle set of bars, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to select these faces here, then go to Mesh Tools and activate Multi-Cut. Then I'm going to hold down Shift so the cut is very straight, and then left click, hold and drag to create a cut and a set of edges on the selected faces. And I'm going to do this twice. Then I'm going to snap these vertices to the grid and give 3 units of space between these two inserted edges. We now have the geometry to create the extra bar. Let's select these two faces, hold Shift, right click, hold, and choose Bridge Faces. Then we're going to go up and do the same thing for the one in the middle and the one for the very top. We now created an extra thick bar that is on the left hand side of the door bars. Again, I think creating this might have been overkill. We could have just used an existing set, but sometimes I get carried away creating unique geometry. But I do think it looks better with the extra bar at the very left, kind of giving additional support. Now let's go ahead and adjust the spacing for the vertical bars. We're going to eyeball it right now and we'll adjust them more accurately and precisely later. So I just want to move them over and kind of get them into position. I also want to add an additional horizontal bar that will be positioned more to the upper half of the door. So we're going to select these faces and then we'll use the multi-cut tool again to insert a set of edges. Then go to Mesh Tools, enable multi-cut, hold Shift, left click, hold and drag to make a straight cut. And we're going to do that twice. Let's snap these vertices to the grid and make sure there's 2 units between them. We now have the geometry to create our horizontal bar. Switch over to Face Component Mode, select 2 faces, hold Shift, right click, hold, and choose Bridge Faces. We're going to repeat this for all of the faces going across. Let's delete history and make slight adjustment to the top upper bars by pulling them down a bit. We're now going to add additional detail for where these door bars would be attached to the inner door frame of the building, just like we did for the window bars. So we're going to come up to the top, select this top face, hold Shift, left click, drag to extrude and then snap that face to the top of the door frame. We're going to do this all around the door bars. So we're going to select some of the faces, extrude them and then snap them. We're going to do this for all the sides and the bottom. We want to double check in front view that all of the extruded faces are aligned to the inner door frame, and it looks like they are. I also noticed that the bars need to be pushed into the door frame a bit more. So let's go ahead and reposition the entire mesh to be more closer to the door and inside the door frame. When we do this, the door handle is overlapping with the door bars. So we need to adjust the door handle by manually adjusting the vertices and make sure that this door handle is no longer overlapping. I'm going to slightly adjust the second bar from the bottom to be moved up, and it's looking pretty good. We now have to make sure the spacing between each bar is the same. So let's go to front view, switch over to Vertex Component Mode, and move each bar to be about 13 grid units from each other. I'm going to do this manually for each bar by moving one, counting the spaces between, and moving the other one, making sure that we still maintain 2 units of thickness for each bar until we have even spacing. And just to mention again, you don't have to be this precise. You could manually just move these bars until you have what looks like even spacing. The player will be unlikely to notice some slight difference in spacing. So here we are, and it's looking pretty good. The last thing we need to add is a section for where the lock would go. So I'm going to select these faces here, and use the multi-cut tool to insert a set of edges. Again, if you hold down Shift, left click drag, this will create a straight cut. Let's adjust these vertices a bit, snap them to the grid, and then grab these two vertices in the front and move them in. Let's go to Perspective Viewport, switch over to Face Component Mode, select these two interfaces and bridge them, and then select this face and extrude, making sure we snap to the inner door frame. And here we have our geometry for the lock. Let's delete history and adjust the pivot point to be on the bottom of these bars. And actually I'm going to place mine in the same spot where the door is. But honestly, it doesn't really matter where we place this pivot point, because these doors will not be openable. We also need to delete unseen faces here in the back of the mesh. I'm going to reset the grid to 10. And now we are done with the bars for the door. There is a slight adjustment I want to make to the window bars. I'm going to change the grid spacing back to 1 unit. And we have 3 units of space at the top of these window bars. But on the bottom we only have 2. And I want to make that adjustment so there's equal amount of space. This is not really a big deal, but it is bothering me. So I'm just going to quickly move these vertices up to have 3 units of space on the bottom. And we are done. And let's reset the grid back to 10 units. Let's export and test inside Unreal Engine 4 because we haven't done that in a while. So I'm going to duplicate the window bars 3 more times so we get to see what it would look like completed in game. Then I'm going to select everything and export, overwriting our Miami Corner Store FBX. Inside Unreal Engine 4, let's re-import. I'm going to press Alt-6 for lighting only view and take a look. And everything is looking good. The window and door bars look good. The front window shutter looks good. Let's take a look at the side and the back. And of course we want to jump in and run around the building from player's point of view. And it's looking good. Let's go ahead, save all. Go back to my LT. Delete the extra bars. And reset the rotation back to 0. Again, we'll reposition these into place when we have this one UV'd. We are now done with the window and door bars.